The chilling truth behind the Ukraine-Russia war. On the morning of February 24, 2022, the world awoke to a nightmare. The distant sounds of artillery echoed through the once peaceful cities of Ukraine as Russian forces began their full-scale invasion. But the seeds of this conflict were sown long before the first missile struck Kyiv, and the terrifying reality of this war is rooted in a complex, almost apocalyptic web of power, history, and geopolitics. The shadows of history, a legacy of tension. To truly understand why Russia invaded Ukraine, you must peer into the dark corridors of history. Ukraine, nestled between Europe and Russia, has long been a pawn in a larger geopolitical chess game. For centuries, it was absorbed into the Russian Empire and later became part of the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked Ukraine's independence, but it did not mark an end to its troubles. For Russia, Ukraine was never just another country. It was part of its sphere of influence, a buffer zone against Western Europe, and a piece of its cultural identity. When Ukraine began leaning toward the West, especially after the 2014 Euromaidan protests, which ousted the pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych, Russian President Vladimir Putin saw this as a threat. The West's influence was creeping ever closer to Russia's borders, and NATO's potential expansion into Ukraine became a terrifying specter for Putin. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 was just the beginning, a bold and bloody move by Russia to stake its claim over what it saw as its rightful territory. But it was merely the first chapter of the horror to come. The gasoline of geopolitics. This war isn't just about land. It's about power. Ukraine sits atop crucial resources, fertile lands, natural gas pipelines, and access to the Black Sea, making it a valuable prize in any geopolitical struggle. Russia, Europe, and the United States all have a vested interest in Ukraine, and for Putin, keeping it out of the West's grasp became a matter of national security. The looming threat of Ukraine joining NATO, an alliance originally formed to counter Soviet power, was like a ticking time bomb in Moscow. If Ukraine were to join, Russia would face Western military forces at its doorstep. The Kremlin's rhetoric became increasingly paranoid, accusing NATO of encircling Russia and threatening its sovereignty. In this view, the invasion of Ukraine was a preemptive strike to prevent a perceived existential threat. But behind these justifications lies a far more frightening reality: the unchecked ambitions of a regime willing to wage war on its neighbor. Putin's vision, a haunting dream. Putin's vision for Ukraine and Russia is where the real terror begins. He sees the two countries as part of a greater Russia, a unified Slavic nation bound by culture, history, and religion. Ukraine's move toward democracy and the West is, in Putin's eyes, not just a betrayal, it's a dangerous ideological threat. The West represents freedom, liberalism, and democracy, values that stand in stark contrast to Putin's autocratic vision. In many ways, this war is a clash of civilizations, with Putin attempting to drag Ukraine back into the shadows of authoritarianism. The scariest part, he's willing to rewrite the rules of modern warfare to do it. The invasion, with its brutal bombings of civilian areas, use of disinformation, and threats of nuclear escalation, shows a terrifying disregard for human life. This is not just a war over territory, it's a war over the future of democracy itself. The nightmares of war, civilians caught in the crossfire. The true horror of this war is unfolding in the streets and cities of Ukraine. Once thriving metropolises have been reduced to rubble, with millions of Ukrainians fleeing their homes as refugees. Those who remain face daily bombardments, cut off from basic supplies like food, water, and medicine. The war has created a humanitarian crisis on an unimaginable scale, with reports of mass graves, torture, and widespread civilian casualties. Entire towns have been wiped off the map, and in their place, a terrifying silence lingers, broken only by the distant echoes of artillery. The psychological toll on Ukrainians is incalculable. Families torn apart, children growing up amid the constant fear of air raids, and entire generations scarred by the trauma of war. It's not just a physical invasion, it's the deliberate destruction of a nation's soul. The global nightmare. What comes next? The war in Ukraine isn't just a regional conflict, it's a warning to the world. As the fighting rages on, the threat of a wider conflict looms ominously. Russia has repeatedly hinted at the use of nuclear weapons if it feels cornered, and the potential for this war to spill over into Europe, or even beyond, is a haunting possibility. The West's response, economic sanctions, military aid to Ukraine, and diplomatic isolation has slowed Russia's advance but has not stopped it. The global economy is feeling the shockwaves, with energy prices skyrocketing and food supplies disrupted. But the scariest question remains, how far is Putin willing to go? Will he stop at Ukraine, or is this just the beginning of a broader attempt to restore Russia's former glory, at any cost? Conclusion: a world on edge. The Ukraine-Russia war is more than a battle over borders, it's a struggle for the future of international order. The chilling reality is that this conflict could reshape the world as we know it, plunging it into a new era of uncertainty and chaos. As the world watches in fear, one thing is clear: